The very first mention of the tenor, or viola, in England was between the 15th and 17th century, referring to an instrument that was the same range or doubled as the tenor voice. In the 17th century, the tenor violas were sometimes tuned an octave lower than the violin, and the smaller tenors tuned to the same pitches as the viola we know today. The violin was known in England as early as the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, around 1600. Charles II, 1630 to 1685, spent part of his exile at Versailles, and he was hugely impressed by the presentation of opera, ballet and music at the court. He activated two groups of his own on his return to England. There surely must have been some violas amongst this initiative. Theatres in England at this time did not offer the same opportunities or music to violists as in parts of Europe, for example Venice, Paris and Hamburg. It is certain that in early English operas they were only scored for 3 string parts, therefore not including the viola. An extremely important orchestral viola moment, Henry Purcell, in Dido Ananias, 1677. He wrote for violin 1 and 2, and viola 1 and 2, and bass in the overture. The viola part was also independent of the tenor voice during the opera. The fact that the viola was not included in the trio sonata, the popular ensemble music form from Italy of the day, contributed to its decrease in popularity. The 2 melody instruments and continuo did not include the viola, but usually 2 violins and continuo. This form was used widely by Purcell, Corelli, Bach, Vivaldi and others. Although very little solo music was composed for the viola in these early times, there were a few. These are not well-known composers or works, but we wanted to point them out. To name a few: William Flackton, Benjamin Blake, William Herschel. William Flackton was born in Canterbury in 1709 and remembered as the first composer to write original sonatas for the viola to be published in England. Tim and James will play William Flackton's sonata in C minor. Racing ahead in history, really because there isn't a lot of viola news to report. Now on to a few important English viola players before Lionel Tertis. None, of course, who brought the viola to the fore as a solo instrument, as Tertis did. First to mention, Alfred Gibson, 1849 to 1924. He played the viola in the Joachim Quartet and was professor at the Royal Academy of Music. There was a famous incident with Lionel Tertis after he had performed the Mendelssohn and Wieniawski D minor concertos on the viola, a fifth lower. Gibson was present and made derogatory comments to the effect that he presumed that next he would be playing on the other side of the bridge. The viola, Gibson said, was never meant to play in such high registers. Leave that to the pig department, he said. Next violist, Alfred Hobday, 1870 to 1942. Certainly the most distinguished British violist before Tertis and Primrose. He led the viola section at the Royal Opera House, and when Tertis turned down the principal position in the newly formed London Symphony Orchestra in 1904, Hobday was offered the position. There were not even many actual instruments made in earlier times. A few violas were made by English luthiers in the 18th century. Best instruments made by Daniel Parker, Peter Walmsley, Benjamin Banks, William Forster, and Panormo. There were active and brilliant schools of viola playing across Europe. In Germany, Hermann Ritter led the German school, even creating the large model viola. In France, Maurice Viau inspired works from French and Belgian composers. From the 20th century, this changed dramatically with Tertis's influence, and others carrying the torch. There developed a Russian, Israeli, Belgian, French, German, Austrian, and American schools of playing. None of these great players ever had long-term careers as soloists, but they made a huge impact in their various countries. This was left to Lionel Tertis to create acceptance and an atmosphere where the viola was accepted as a solo instrument. The result of his influence was a plethora of wonderful players coming to the fore between 1910 to the end of the Second World War. To name but a few: Rebecca Clark, Eric Coates, Winifred Copperwheat, Paul Cropper, Harry Danks, Errington, Max Gilbert, Fred Riddle, Bernard Shaw. The English school of viola playing includes many other violists who were not Tertis students, but who were influenced by him. Cecil Aronowitz, Nanny Jamison, John White, William Primrose. Tertis certainly was the father of the English school of viola playing. We are leaping now from the music of William Flackton, born in 1709, to that of Frederick Delius, born in 1862. That's because there is no solo music written for the viola in the interim period. Frederick Delius was born in Bradford to German parents in January 1862. Although Delius did not compose anything principally for the viola, Tertis admired his music and adapted 5 works for viola, including the second and third violin sonatas. Delius's musical development was cosmopolitan, drawing inspiration from Norway, Germany and France, but little from the British music of his time.
Although Delius lived in France for most of his adult life, he's very much remembered as a British composer, and in Britain his works are most celebrated. He wrote several violin sonatas, and in fact the second and third violin sonatas were both transcribed and arranged by Lionel Tertis for the viola. And although we're not going to play them for you today, I would really recommend going to find a recording and listening to them. So what we will play for you today is the Caprice and Elegy, which were originally written by Delius for cello and orchestra. However, again, Tertis, a name you're going to hear a lot during the course of this documentary, made an arrangement for viola and piano and played them frequently.